Carrie Colbert with us. She's founding and general partner at Curate Capital in Houston, Texas. Today's going to be a fun one. We're going to discuss Curate Capital, Carrie's background as a serial investor, and it is brought to you by podbuyer.com. This episode, if you want to start your own podcast, monetize it, you can go to podbuyer.com. Carrie, welcome to the pod. Tell me a bit more about yourself and what you're up to nowadays.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Charles. It's nice to chat with you. I really enjoy all the content you put out there. Thank you for all the helpful information. Yeah, I'm based in Houston, Texas, and I made a career pivot about, 8 or 10 years ago now. Early on, I spent almost 20 years in the energy industry, and all of those early decisions were just very practical and pragmatic in nature. So I studied engineering because that's where I got the best scholarships, and then the best jobs were here in Houston in the energy industry. So I was never, super passionate about that, but I had the great fortune of working for a privately held company called Hilcorp for the majority of that career. And I worked directly for the owner, who's now a billionaire. So really learned a lot of entrepreneurial lessons from him when it comes to scaling a company. So we scaled from less than 100 million when I joined to over to the billions when I left. And he really had such an entrepreneurial culture. So even though that industry is kind of old school and stodgy in many ways, I credit him with being a very, very much a leader and visionary when it came to incentivizing his employees and creating a culture of ownership and urgency. We all had some stake of ownership or equity in the company, and we're able to invest more money as we liked different deals the company was doing. And really that ultimately created the financial freedom for me to walk away, not because I was unhappy, but just because I wanted to pursue something that resonated with me a bit more personally. And I didn't know what that thing was going to be. I just knew I wanted it to be something entrepreneurial and something that aligned with my just personal interests and passions and values. And so I kind of stumbled into the world of investing online because I also kind of stumbled into being a small-time influencer in the early days of social media. And I only mention that because that's how I started connecting with brands and would very naively ask, hey, are you looking for any investors? Are you looking for any, board members? And lo and behold, that's really how I began investing. So I spent about 5 years investing my own money into these sorts of businesses and really saw the opportunity there. Generally speaking, women-founded businesses are underfunded. The stats show still like less than 2% of VC dollars go to women, but yet, study after study and also my experience shows that women are very capital efficient and good on delivering, good returns to investors. So because of the relationships I had in that space and because of the dynamics that play in the market, I thought that was a great place to kind of go in and start a venture capital firm as an outsider, shake things up a bit and do things a bit differently. And so that's how I started out here. And so we closed our first fund in 2022. Our goal was 10 million. We ultimately raised 15. But what was, even more kind of gratifying to me was the way we did it. And what I mean by that is that over 80% of our investors are women. Over 2/3 of them are new to venture capital. And we really didn't raise from the East Coast or West Coast. So kind of a middle America was our sweet spot. And we really activated a new demographic of investor in many ways.
Fascinating. Let's start with your mentor. Tell us first how to scale a company from 100 million to $1 billion, and tell us about the main lessons and the man himself.
Yeah, it was really quite the ride. I think what is really special is, sometimes when we as women in particular, but probably people in general, sometimes we make these career changes and it can look like things are lost, right? Like I'm not practicing as an engineer. I'm not even working in that industry. Like, gosh, was all that wasted? But it's really nice to see how much can carry over. And so, yeah, I worked for Jeff Hildebrand here in Houston, Texas. And it's the biggest company that people have probably not ever heard of. Now, like I said, a multi-billion-dollar company. But really, he made his whole business out of buying out of favor assets. What I mean by that is as these, big majors, if you're thinking Exxon or Shell or BP, their economies of scale would make some of these too small for them. It was too hard for them to make money on some of these old assets, whether in the Gulf of Mexico, for example, or Alaska. But Jeff would come in, especially during hard times, when maybe prices were low and other companies were struggling, but because, he didn't have a lot of debt on the business, he didn't have a lot of, investors or shareholders to answer to, he was able to be nimble and execute and buy up those properties at a bargain. And then because of our attention to detail and that, entrepreneurial culture, really still make a lot of money from these assets that, the majors were walking away from. And so that's how he's built his whole multi-billion-dollar industry or multi-billion-dollar business in that industry. And I would say we take a similar approach. Many in the traditional venture capital industry, one, shy away from women, but two, shy away from the CPG industry. And we think there's still a lot of money to be made in CPG brands, particularly women founded, because they are out of favor. So generally speaking, the valuations are lower when we come in. We're able to get high equity stakes and then go to work and help them build those businesses to a successful outcome for everyone. Oh, I lost you. I think you're on mute, Charles.
Why are women more efficient on the capital allocation side of things? And yeah, if you can cover also more of their strengths and more of their weaknesses vs men.
Yeah, and obviously I'm painting with broad brushes here. And so I don't mean to overgeneralize. Obviously, we all have our own individual personalities and strengths and weaknesses. But generally speaking, I think, I've got lots of thoughts on why women are underfunded, but I think that has led to them having to be more capital efficient, right? And so I just see a lot of grittiness, resourcefulness, and just kind of determination to make do with a little, right? That's just kind of the reality. But that actually, as an outsider to the VC industry, I was left kind of scratching my head when I first came into this world because so many would wear it as a badge of honor how much capital they've raised. And while certainly that has its place, that's not the name of the business. The name of the business is right to build a profitable, growing business that's ultimately interesting for acquisition by a strategic or IPO or whatever. But I just saw that the system emphasized this raising money as if that makes you somehow superior or better. And so what I found though is these women who do have a hard time attracting a lot of capital have just learned to make do with little capital. But ultimately, I think that's a good thing because we don't have to always be chasing these billion-dollar exits. You can build a great company, and if you're not raising too much capital and you're being wise and efficient with how you're spending it, you can sell for 100 million or 200 million and still have that be a great outcome for both the founder and all the other investors.
So how should one, as a woman, how should you balance, the testosterone moving forward, raising a lot of money, challenging others vs estrogen sort of, and, being a team player, being more on the cooperative vs the competitive side?
Yeah, it's a good point. And I meant to bring this up in the last question. I think in general, I see women being more collaborative in nature with one another, trying to help each other out and drive towards those good outcomes. I think there's a lot more discussion these days about how women lead. And, we went through the era where there was like the girl boss, and there was the lean in from Sheryl Sandberg and all of that's good, but it sometimes comes from a place of a little, sort of privilege and out of touchness with the average person. And I think, for a good reason, we're seeing people really not try to conform their personality and their leadership characteristics with what is expected in the world, but really kind of owning, in some cases, their femininity or their, whatever traits make you truly you. And, it sounds trite to say, but like, we don't need you to conform to look like someone else. We need you to stand out and be your own, person and bring your own perspective and strengths and experiences and everything, because that's when we're going to drive towards better outcomes for everyone. And so, for instance, when I came onto the venture capital scene, I was looking across the landscape, and quite frankly, and this was just 5 or so years ago, all the venture capital funds looked and sounded the same. What do I mean by that? Well, if I were to go to 10 venture capital websites, they would all have navy blue as their color, and they would all have the same very serious looking fonts. And so, when I came in as an outsider, I looked at, how can we change this up? And for me, it was all about kind of democratizing access to understanding venture capital, not just participating. And so, just from a personal standpoint, I gravitate towards bright colors and, happy things. And so I kind of burst onto the scene with this, hot pink branding and bold fonts and, kind of some bold social media content and stuff like that. But it really was effective. And, I think that's why we ultimately had 80% of our investors being women and 2/3 being new. Because as I talked about, what is venture capital and what, who can invest, as I just talked about those things in everyday language versus that jargon and lingo that gets so often tossed around, more people realized that they were eligible to participate and wanted to participate. And so I mentioned that only as a, perhaps example for others, like, you don't need to conform and look the same, and you don't need to try to fit in, all the rooms and tables that currently exist. You can also bring your own unique spin to it, and that is going to bring a new energy, to the perhaps dated philosophies. Certainly, conventional wisdom is there for a reason, and we espouse that where appropriate. But there's always room to kind of shake things up to some extent.
Yeah, I love your website, love your branding. I'm also very bullish on female founders, mostly because of the chip on the shoulder thesis that I have. Anyone that has a chip on their shoulder, something to prove, is someone great to invest in, generally speaking, in this male-dominated world. I want to ask, basically, CPG was my first business, and I failed miserably. It was super hard. We were dependent on Facebook ads and Insta ads back then. It was a nootropic, a supplement you take for the brain. It's such a hard business, and I don't see much opportunity in that space. Where am I going wrong into this, or what micro niche is there to be quote unquote exploited in the CPG world?
Yeah, certainly. It's a fair question. And you see a lot of the, traditional VC investors kind of eschewing this space as well. However, I think we're seeing kind of a reckoning in the market that is a good thing, right? For a while, valuations just got so inflated in this whole VC world, including CPG. But really, as an outsider and coming from a business where we were really trained on, the underlying numbers of the business, that's what we try to pay attention to as we evaluate businesses. And, thankfully, we haven't gotten too caught up in any of these inflated valuations, but we try to tie, where we invest to reality, not some pie in the sky sort of valuation. So if you get the terms right up front, and if it is not a super capital intensive business, I think there's still a lot of room for great outcomes. In fact, you may have seen the Siete Foods deal announced this week, where they exited for 1.2 billion, less than a decade or so from the founding. And in that case, by the way, of course, it was a family of 7 people that created, but it was ultimately a woman who had autoimmune issues, as well as some allergies that led her to create these grain-free products. So you've got a woman experiencing a pain point and then ultimately developing the product that she wanted to address her own pain point. So it's really a great story for the Garza family out of Austin with this exit to Pepsi this week. So that's one example, and we could point out another half dozen or so female-founded consumer brands that have become unicorns in the last 5 or so years. And so I think you just really have to be addressing a hole in the market and kind of be on trend, and then not raising too much capital, and then there can still be some great outcomes. Stats show that women control over 80% of purchasing decisions within households, and so that's why we really have a firmly rooted belief that women are developing the products and services that they want for themselves and their family and their home.
Love it. And with 19 million raised, do you think that would be sufficient for this year? Or are you raising another fund soon?
We're launching our second fund right now. Yeah, we're going to market with that, and probably targeting about a $50 million raise. So I think what we're doing is working, and we're excited to do more of the same.
Interesting. And will this second fund have a similar thesis to the first one?
It will, yes. Like I said, even with these economic headwinds, we're very pleased with how our portfolio overall is performing. From Fund 1, we've invested that into about 16 companies and have seen a great growth already. And we're really leveraging not only women as investors, but we also have a great number of influencers who have invested on with us. And so we're really proud to add them to the ecosystem because, as you mentioned, one of the tough things in this world is customer acquisition. And so it's always great to have some hack to those paid ads on Facebook and Instagram. So we're excited to have this really core group of women who have incredible followings and convert incredibly well so that they can help promote the brands that we invest in. It's a nice symbiotic relationship for everyone in our ecosystem.
And do some of your investors also come on board as advisors? Like, do you put them in touch with the startups they invest in?
Absolutely. It's certainly more than our small team internally can handle. And so we love having other entrepreneurs at our disposal who are willing to take a phone call with a founder and, consult with them as needed. And many of those, consultants are also investors of ours. But yes, I mean, that's one of the great things is just all the wonderful people from other investors to other entrepreneurs. We love having those resources at the ready for our founders because as we all know, there are going to be challenges and hurdles and hard times in these businesses. And so having someone who can relate, who's been there and done that is really a special thing for these founders to have someone to lean on in those times.
One of my favorite niche nowadays is FemTech. Any thoughts on the growth of FemTech and what it represents for the industry?
Absolutely. I think for too long, women and women's health has been overlooked from both an industry and investor standpoint. And, while I'm certainly no medical expert, we're always on the lookout for companies that, are already surrounded by all the medical expertise they need. But when they're ready to go to market and scale those with effective marketing, I think that's where, we make a good partner. For instance, we're in one medical device that is essentially a stud finder for the spine to make getting epidurals easier. And it's certainly not rocket science, but just no one had addressed that literal pain point for women. And so I'm proud to say we got FDA approval earlier this year. And so that device will be coming to market pretty soon.
Very nice. What challenges have some of your startups faced since COVID?
Well, I think, gosh, a ton of them. And right now, this year, particularly the markets have just been very difficult to navigate with the economy, as it is, and, with the unknowns, with the political and, election environment coming up. People are having a hard time fundraising. And, I think that's why we're seeing such this, return focus to driving towards profitability because, funding sources are just really hard to come by right now. And so even backing up, to the COVID era, I think some of the good things is that we're able to do, things like this online. But, we are missing that touch point, that face-to-face touch point with the customer in many ways that we had before. So, I think it's still kind of a new world and everyone's trying to figure out what works and what doesn't in this, kind of online world first, but people are still craving that in person. So, and then, like I said, right now, the fundraising environments, it's challenging for everyone. Even successful companies are having a hard time right now. So it's really incumbent on all of us to drive towards that profitability and to think outside the box when it comes to fundraising. We have one portfolio company that has found success recently with the founder going out to top customers and asking them if they might be interested in investing, or going in and speaking at different groups of women, whether it be a sorority group or a charity group or whatever. Connecting with people in real life and getting the founder out there has really led to some great checks and then from investors that are not your typical angel or VC investors. So I think that's really the message that we're trying to drive to our founders is you've got to think outside the box right now. It's true that traditional VCs are sitting on the sidelines probably through the end of the year in many cases, and so let's see what else we can do to either cut expenses or get investors in from kind of outside that traditional box.
Tell me about a day in your GP life. What does it look like? At what time do you wake up? What's your routines? And yeah, how do you manage your time?
Oh goodness, I think as you can imagine, no day is the same for sure. Uh, but I am not one of those super early people, but I get up around 6 or 6:30, driven by my two young kids. I'm kind of on the older end of the spectrum, but had kids later in the life, so I'm still, have young ones who are in elementary school, and so get them off to school. And then usually tackle some, emails and computer work, plan my day, and then it's meetings and podcasts and all that. So I'm a big believer in block scheduling. So some days are meeting free, so I can just dig in and get some work done. But you never know what pops up. And I sit on the boards of a number of our companies. So sometimes traveling to board meetings, or traveling to meet with our companies in person, speaking at conferences and conventions, and just also, speaking to potential investors. I think even when we're not fundraising, we're always trying to build those relationships. I think one thing I didn't anticipate in starting this was just how in the weeds I would have to be for the early years. But thankfully now we're finally getting to a place where we've been able to bring on some more support, so I can focus more on what I'm good at versus everything having to pass through my hands. So it feels good to be reaching that milestone for sure.
How are you optimizing this brain of yours? What are you reading? How are you learning nowadays?
Yeah, well, isn't that the great thing about today's day and age? There we can learn all the time, and I'm certainly a lifelong learner, always reading. Two of my favorite books recently that I keep recommending, and everyone else loves them, are by the same guy, Dan Sullivan. The Gap and the Gain and Who Not How have been pretty transformative for me lately. So those are two of my favorite books. I've also enjoyed re-listening to Ali Webb's biography. It's called Messy. I don't listen to many books, but when the founders actually, or the authors in this case, narrate their own books, I'll do an audiobook. And I know Ali personally, and so it's been fun. After reading it when it first came out last year, I've recently re-listened, and she's certainly been through a lot and learned a lot in her entrepreneurial journey. So that's what we're reading right now. Within our team, we try to have a book club kind of book of the month. So we just finished Who Not How, and now we're on to Ali Webb's Messy.
Yeah, I love Dan Sullivan. Classic right there. So, how are you
Absolutely.
embracing AI nowadays? Like in your case, I think of launching an outreach campaign to female founders only and having them go through a list of criterias and then the AI suggesting the best investment outcomes out of all of them. So, how are you actually leveraging AI nowadays?
It's a good question. I'll admit that we are just scratching the surface of that with some of our, kind of processes and procedures with investment due diligence, as well as portfolio company support. So I am certainly not the expert on that, but in the spirit of working smarter, not harder, we're certainly, undertaking some of those initiatives. I have to say, I was on a panel earlier this year out in Silicon Valley, and there was a VC investor there who now makes all of his decisions by AI. So they have taken the human touch out of it, and they are just totally depending on AI to do their due diligence and come to their investment decisions. So interesting model. We'll see if there's some happy medium in between. I'm not sure that I would totally take out the human component, but it is certainly a tool that everyone and every company should be evaluating and using to some point at this time.
Yeah, let's hope that has great algorithms and has refined that. If so, then that may be very useful. If not, it may be dangerous, right? If it's
Yeah.
hallucinating and all of that. But yeah, let me ask you that. Like, if you have a female founder in front of you, what boxes are you looking to check? What signals are you looking into a founder that you'd absolutely invest in?
Yeah, of course, we have the standard due diligence list, and we'll dig into the numbers deeply. But the other part of that I found to be as big of a component and more of a wild card is, just the character of the founder. That's hard to do due diligence on a character, but we certainly believe in relationship-based investing. And that's not to say that someone has to come from some Ivy League school and, be super networked from day one. It just means that I like to meet someone and take some time to get to know them and watch their growth until they get to the stage where they're ready for an investment for us. And then it makes it more of a no-brainer. I have a certain risk tolerance, and I'll say that meeting someone on a Zoom and telling them, right after a 30-minute Zoom that I'm going to invest $500,000 is not really in my comfort zone. So we certainly kind of like to watch, how do they handle adversity? How do they handle feedback? Are they open to feedback? Are they open to being collaborative with their investors? Are they transparent in their information sharing? So some of that stuff just does take time to get to know. And we fortunately have a lot of founders who do want to work with us and are open to kind of like forming that relationship well before time to write a check. And so in this world, that's one more way of kind of de-risking it for me, because let's face it, the fact of the matter is that we are still ultimately minority, owners in these companies, and we're not calling the shots. So it has to be someone who's open to that collaborative, relationship between a founder and investor. And, I've just seen it go wrong too many times. I jokingly say that the founder investor relationship is like a marriage, but without any of the good parts of marriage, whatever you might consider those to be, love and beyond. There's no really good way to unwind it. So you want to be certain that you're both comfortable. It's a two-way street. They have to like me too, from a professional standpoint, and as well as I have to, like and be comfortable with them and their business. So, that's what we try to do, is take some time to get to know one another before we make that commitment as an investment.
And for young female founders in their 20s out there, what general advice would you have for them?
Yeah, great question. I think part of that is, just being open to feedback, being open to the perspectives of others. It's not a personal attack. I've seen many women just get so personally offended, when someone gives them feedback on their business. And especially once we're an investor, like, we're on the same team, right? We're all driving towards the same outcome. And just because I might have experience or expertise, it in no way, demeans you and your, position and your efforts. It's not like we're pointing out flaws. We're just all trying to drive to the best outcome together. So, I think being humble enough to take feedback and understanding that you don't know everything about everything. I think many young professionals especially feel that pressure, like they're supposed to have all the answers. And the fact of the matter is you don't, nor can you. No person can be an expert on everything. So being open to the expertise and experience of others, not really intimidated by that, is really core to these young professionals. Sometimes you don't even know what you don't know. And so I think a bit of humility will help everyone be more successful in the end.
Where can people find out more about you, Carrie?
Yeah, on Instagram, my personal one is just at Carrie C, Carriec, and then for Curate, our account is at curate.capital, and that's also our website.
That was Carrie Colbert and Charles Cormier for